It's the amazing Rico Brogna podcast with your host, Evan Roberts.
I would say great to be here with another edition of Rico Brogna, but it is not great to be here. I said to Hoff, I said, let's not do a Monday version, a Tuesday version of Rico Brogna. Let's give it a couple of days, and then we'll have a brand new episode on Wednesday. But the reason we are doing a new edition of Rico Brogna is because another day has gone by and another injury has hit New York Mets camp. And so, as you all know by now, this happened probably many hours ago. Sean Manaea is dealing with an oblique, and it is very, very likely, if not a certainty, that he's going to start the year on the injured list. So let's talk about it. We will hear from you. We will read some negative emails, some positive emails, but I want to give you my honest opinion on this situation. Number one, we have to make a choice as Met fans, okay? Choice number one, and I have lived in this world, is to assume that any injury is going to be worse than what the Mets are telling us. And we've done this a lot over the years, more times than not being right, where the Mets will say, oh, this is minor, it's only a couple of weeks. We assume the worst, and it turns out to be the worst. So I think one's opinion on Sean Manaea and the state of the New York Met rotation is really based on, do you believe Carlos Mendoza? Do you believe that Sean Manaea's injury, his oblique issue, is only going to keep him from throwing for a week or two, and he's a little bit behind to start the season? If you believe that, if you think this is a minor-ish injury in which he's only going to miss maybe the first few weeks of the season, then there's no reason to panic. I'd be the first to tell you, no reason to panic, and we will lay out specifically why that wouldn't be a big deal. But if we live in a world, and I have lived in this world, in which we just assume Sean Manaea's oblique is going to basically fall off, and we will not see him till the All-Star break, then there's no spinning. This is a huge blow to the Mets rotation, something that is not even supposed to be a strength of this team going into the start of the season. So before we even continue, I think your panic level is based on how you think this is going to play out. If you think this plays out the way Carlos Mendoza described it on Monday, then you're not panicking. But if you feel Sean Manaea is going to miss basically 2 months, and this is going to be worse than the way Mendy described it, then you are panicking. Right now, I admit, I have no freaking idea. And I think we're going to know soon, though. I think over the next 2 weeks, whether Manaea is able to pick up a freaking baseball and throw bullpen sessions and begin his work back to rejoining the Met rotation, we're going to know that answer in the next couple of weeks. I do kind of side on the cautiously optimistic side, and I think the reason I do that is not because the Mets had a great year last year and I just want to, see, I was going to say watermelons, but it's really rainbows and, rainbows and apple pie. Is that the phrase when you want to be optimistic? I don't think it's that. I think it's a trusting of Mendoza, that he is very straightforward. He told us the news about Nick Madrigal, which we're not going to spend that much time on, and it's bad news. And he said it. It's bad news. It sucks. We're not going to see him for a while. In the case of Sean Manaea, and I do want to play you this clip from Monday in which Mendoza explains the situation with him, and then gets a follow-up question on it, I think you'll hear that there's a level of confidence in this. And while I don't have a level of confidence necessarily in all injuries working out well, I do have a level of confidence in the honesty of this manager, Carlos Mendoza. In the past, it feels like managers are basically lying to us, and general managers are basically lying to us. I don't get that sense from this manager. Now, we can all be proven wrong, obviously, but here's Carlos Mendoza on Monday talking about the status of Sean Manaea.
So it could take 7, 14, 21 days to heal, and then once he's symptom-free, he'll start his throwing again.
When that happens this time of year, does he have to restart his whole program?
Yeah, especially after, it depends, because if in 7 days he's symptom-free, and talking to Sean, he's pretty optimistic. And, this is a guy that was throwing live EP not too long ago because he didn't think it was much of it, but he got to a point, it's like, man, we got to give it a look. And that's when we decided to do the MRI yesterday. So hopefully we'll see him back here pretty soon, and then we'll go from there.
This is amazing.
So if it's 7 days and he starts throwing in a week, then it's not the end of the world. If it takes 4 weeks for him to start throwing, and that's why I say we're going to get a much better idea on this over the next couple of weeks, because if he starts throwing within a week and it really is that minor, and obviously there were no setbacks, then Sean Manaea's return is not going to be that far past the start of this season. If it's not 7 days, but it's more like 21 days like he described, and he's not picking a baseball up until the middle of March, then yeah, now we're all of a sudden looking at maybe May 1st until we see Sean Manaea. But here's why that really determines how much I would panic as a Met fan. Look, I'm not going to tell you that I trust Griffin Canning, because that'd be a lie. I'm not going to tell you I even trust Paul Blackburn. I think he's, an okay back of the rotation arm, but how much can any of us trust him? Tyler McGill, I think, is what he is. I think he's a fine swing arm. There's a lot of uncertainty around Clay Holmes. We're hoping David Peterson builds off of the second half of last year. And as long as Senga is healthy, I do trust Kodai Senga. But their pitching depth is obviously being tested in the early going with Montas out and now Manaea missing some time. But hear me out on this. If Manaea is back in the middle of April, it really isn't that big of a deal. Because I started mapping out the Met rotation, and Carlos has said numerous times, like, they want to use a six-man rotation with Senga, but because of all of the off days early in the season, they don't need to have a six-man rotation early in the season. And I started to do the math on this. They would not need to go to a six-man rotation until the middle of April. In fact, I have the date written down of April 19th. At home against the St. Louis Cardinals. We're talking about the second homestand of the year, and we are talking, the middle of April until the Mets would actually need to go full six-man rotation, which means the Mets could get by, assuming there are no more injuries, and we'll get into kind of that and why that is concerning. But then you have David Peterson, you have Kodai Senga, you have Clay Holmes, and then two of the three guys we've talked about, at least filling out the rotation to begin with, which is, let's just guess, Paul Blackburn and Griffin Canning, since Tyler McGill has options to go back down to the minor leagues. But the way things line up is, and again, this is just assuming everybody can stay healthy and get through spring training, you could have Senga on opening day, David Peterson day 2, Clay Holmes day 3. You have an off day on that Sunday before you go to Miami and play 3 games, and you could go Blackburn, Canning, back to Senga, and Senga would be making that start on an extra days of rest. It would be 5 days of rest. And then as you go around the rotation again, because there's another off day going into opening day at home, you'd have Peterson on 6 days rest, Holmes on 6 days rest, Blackburn, Canning, and Senga with an extra day of rest. You would not have to pitch anybody on regular rest until David Peterson in the final game of the homestand against Miami. Then you have another off day, and now you're looking at a turnaround the rotation, which Holmes is on an extra day, Blackburn's on an extra day, Canning's on an extra day, Senga's on an extra day, Peterson's on an extra day. You would not ask another person to pitch on regular rest until you got to April 16th, the final game of that road trip in which Clay Holmes would pitch on regular rest. And then you could go Blackburn, Canning on regular rest, and that leads you to April 19th. That would be the day where Kodai Senga would be asked to pitch on regular rest. Obviously, the Mets don't plan on doing that. And there you go. There's your sixth guy, which could be Sean Manaea. So after all that, the Mets may not have to go that deep into their depth, assuming McGill is the odd man out. And you could actually have 5 guys take over this rotation, have very few examples of guys pitching on regular rest. And then on April 19th, and I think this is a good case scenario, Manaea is back. And you never have to go that deep into the Mets pitching depth. And that's where I lay out, it's not the end of the freaking world. Where it is the end of the world, where I would get to panic, is if this is long-term. If Sean Manaea tries to throw a bullpen session and the oblique gets worse and he has a setback, then yes, this is not a great rotation. Because all of a sudden you're asking your depth guys, Blackburn, Canning, and McGill, to be a lot more than depth guys. You're asking them to take the baseball every 6 days and be effective. And I want to trust the Met pitching lab. I do. I have no reason other than blind optimism, which I do not have, to tell you Griffin Canning's going to be good. He pitched to a 5 ERA last year despite taking the ball every 5 days in Anaheim. I'd love to think that Jeremy Hefner and the pitching lab can wave a magic wand on him. I can't fully believe that. And here's the other thing that does concern me. Right now, the Mets are being tested with their depth. The depth that David Stearns talks so glowingly about. I love our pitching depth. It's so much better today than it was a year ago. And I agree with him. Their depth is better. Last year, they needed Julio Teheran to make a start in April. But you are now 2 down. You had a depth chart that 1 through 7 looked pretty good. You know, the Canning, Blackburn, and McGills of the world, as I said at the top, 5 through 7 is not bad. When you start asking them to be 3 through 5, it gets a little bit more challenging, or in this case, 4 through 6. And then all of a sudden, you say, all right, if everyone's moving up the chart a little bit, you're an injury away from all of a sudden talking about Brandon Waddell and Justin Hagenman. And now you're going into the depths of the depth that I think would not give us a lot of confidence. Now, all of a sudden, I don't care how deep you are, and the Mets have had depth, now you're going deep into it. Because unfortunately, and the game wasn't on TV, but we saw or heard that Blade Tidwell made a spring training start on Monday against St. Louis. He is not ready to be in the Met rotation in April. He's throwing 98, 99. He had some good moments at AAA, including his last 2 starts before the season ended, but he was walking way too many guys, and he's just not ready. He could be ready in May and June, certainly possible. I'm not going to say it's impossible, but right now, he's not ready. The same goes with Brandon Sproat. So that pitching depth may feel different a couple of months into the season when there are younger arms kind of making or knocking on the door and possibly being the guys that help us out. But as of right now, they are not ready. And so when you go deeper into the Met pitching depth, you're talking about guys like Brandon Waddell, who's pitching in the KBO last year. God knows what he would do here. And Justin Hagenman making starts. And then that leads you to a question that we discussed a little bit on the air on WFAN on Monday, and that is the Jose Butto factor. Now, Jose Butto is a bullpen arm. Carlos Mendoza has made that very, very clear. He is going to be in the bullpen. When Montas goes down, very promptly he's asked, what about Butto? He says, no, Butto's going to stay in the bullpen. Now Sean Manaea has questions around him. And if I'm Carlos Mendoza, I'm for now, and that's the key word here, for now, because we can only live in a world in which we know what's happening with Manaea for now. It could be very different in 2-3 weeks, as we described. I'm keeping Jose Butto in the bullpen. I am not going to rob Peter to pay Paul. I also think that Butto gives you a lot of value in that bullpen as a guy that can eat up a couple of innings. You know, if Griffin Canning's making a start, and I don't know how deep he's going to be able to go into games or how long you trust him in a game, Jose Butto can still be that multi-inning guy. So I am not ready to move Jose Butto into the rotation. I'm not ready to stretch him out. But what makes things dangerous is the New York Mets are now an injury away from either having to do that or doing the thing that you're probably thinking about right now, doing the thing that maybe you're screaming into your phone saying, Evan, how have you not brought this up yet? And that is signing Q, signing Jose Quintana. So the way I view Quintana is this. If this is a fantasy world, if money was no object, and as much as Steve Cohen loves to spend, there is a budget at some point, then of course I would sign Jose Quintana. I would sign Jose Quintana because, A, I trust him more than I trust Griffin Canning and Paul Blackburn and even Tyler McGill. And I would trust him under the guise of, even if everything works out okay with Sean Manaea, and even if Frankie Montas is able to come back in the middle of June. And even if the rest of the rotation stays healthy, as the old saying is, and it's a cliche, but it's true, you never have enough starting pitching. There is no negative to signing Jose Quintana except the cost. The cost is 100%, 110% tax rate. That's the negative. I mean, anyone who says, oh, you can't, he's blocking Griffin Canning, you can't sign Jose Quintana. He's blocking Tyler. Listen, those kinds of things take care of itself. I think we're seeing that here in the early goings of spring training. Guys get hurt. That's just the reality. So what's appealing about Q is that if the Mets sign him right now, it's cost, it's money, I get it, but he may not be there in 3 weeks. So if the Mets' attitude is, look, like Evan said on the Rico, Manaea may be fine. He may be back on April 19th. We don't even need a 6-man rotation till April 19th. It's not a big deal. And it has a chance not to be a big deal. I'll acknowledge that, but it has a chance to not be a big deal. And if it's not a big deal, okay, great. They didn't need to spend $30 million after tax on Jose Quintana. But if it is a big deal, there is a very good chance that a guy like Quintana or a guy like Kyle Gibson or any other depth arm that's still out there, there's a chance they get picked up by somebody else. I don't think they're going to be free agents forever. And that's the negative. That's the negative towards saying, hey, we don't need to rush into signing Jose Quintana. We can continue to wait. We feel good about our depth. We don't think the Manaea thing's that serious. All that is fair and may be true, but that's the case today. And what concerns me as a Met fan, and I think the tone of today's Rico is certainly not panicking. I don't think I'm panicking, but I'm also not going to paint you. What's that phrase I was looking for again? I'm also not going to paint you rose-petaled roses and rainbows. I can't do that. I'm just going to call it like it is, which is there's a chance it may not be the end of the world, but you risk that Manaea doesn't come back as soon as we think, and another guy gets hurt, and then you're feeling, damn, I wish I called Jose Quintana.
Rainbows and lollipops. That's what you're looking for.
Right.
That's what you're looking for.
Yeah. Am I painting rainbows and lollipops off? Are you painting rainbows and lollipops on this fine, fine day?
For Jose Quintana?
No, in general, for the state of this Met rotation now, with multiple injuries as we sit here, not even turning the calendar to March.
No, I'm not. I'm actually I'm getting agitated. But I do have some breaking news for you.
Oh, great. I love breaking news. What do we got?
Mets made a trade.
Nice. A live Rico Brogna trade?
Yes.
Before you tell me the trade, because I have no idea what it is it a very minor trade that's like, we got some minor news, let's talk about it? Or is it a more significant trade? How would you define it?
It's minor, and for what just happened the past, couple weeks with pitching, it makes no sense. It doesn't affect that at all.
Okay.
Do you want me to give you I'll just tell you. Chicago Cubs and the Mets make a trade for Alexander Canario, an outfielder, 24-year-old.
I'm not that familiar with Alexander Canario. I'll have to baseball reference him. So the answer is minor trade.
Would you say that's a 3 out of 10? I told everyone I tweeted it out. I put it on X. I'm like, I'm about to break the news to Evan. I'm curious to see his reaction.
My reaction is to baseball reference him and find out more about him. That's my reference. If there's one thing the New York Mets do not need right now, and I'm not talking about minor league depth because I got no issue with minor league depth, and Canario, I guess, will supply that. But the one thing they do not need for this major league roster is an outfielder. Yeah. If you told me a shortstop, I'd say, okay, back up. If you told me a relief arm, I'd say, sure, you never have enough. If you told me a starter, sure, replenish the depth. But if there's one aspect of the Mets where you're like, I don't think they're going to need much, barring a ton of injuries, it would probably be the outfield depth.
Yeah. Well, I mean, unless they're going to reverse this, because obviously we know like Jet Williams and they've tried some other people out in the outfield who originally played the infield. So maybe they're going to reverse it. Maybe Canario, who's a nice outfielder. Maybe they're going to try him at shortstop. Who knows?
Yeah. I'm looking at Canario's numbers last year in AAA Iowa, 243, 850 OPS, 18 home runs, 47 RBIs. He's still relatively young. He's 24 years old. He'll turn 25 in May. All right, so there you go. That's really all I've got to say about that because it doesn't impact. Right. I'll put it this way. If Alex Canario is making major league starts for the Mets this season, we're in trouble.
Oh, please no.
That's how I would phrase it. But it's funny. The outfield is one area where I feel okay. I feel good. But right now, it is normal and it is okay as a Met fan to look at this rotation and say, hey, I'm a little worried. That's okay. That's an okay thing. Now, we're going to go into more detail on this on our Wednesday edition of the Rico Brogna, but I wanted to do a deep dive on comparing this 25 team to the 24 team. And one thing they got in 2024, and we'll go into more detail on this, that I don't know if they're going to get in 2025, is despite Senga missing as much time as he missed, basically the entire year, and obviously David Peterson missed the first half of the year. So I don't want to act like the Mets didn't have starting pitching injuries, but Jose Quintana went out and made every start. Luis Severino went out and made every start. Sean Manaea went out and made every start. Obviously, that is not the case with Manaea this season. We already know that in February. He is not making every start. Even if he starts throwing a week from now, he is still behind schedule. And while we'd all be thrilled and he would almost have a full season, he would not make 32 starts. So that one's almost dead. The replacement for Luis Severino, in a lot of our eyes, was Frankie Montas. And God knows he's not making 31 starts. So one area that I'm just hoping they can replicate, forget about getting better, is the reliability of some of their arms in their rotation. And sitting here just a couple of days into spring training games, that's obviously taken a massive hit. There's no question. So, again, what do I do with Jose Quintana? I'd like to sign him, but I'm also not stupid. I get it. There's a 110% tax rate on signing him. And as much as Steve Cohen has spent, I don't think he's going to just divvy out that money for Jose Quintana. I think right now the Mets are basically going to trust the depth that they have. Speaking of which, we'll get to some of your emails and some of your thoughts on this whole thing coming up in just a second.
Yeah, because the one thing I know you laid out the list of like what they can do and who they can bring up and all this other stuff, but it's rather concerning that Montas and Manaea are going to miss the start of the season, and I don't know if I can't consider this depth. Like I know that they have bodies, but I'm not really sure if I consider it like depth. Like I feel comfortable going into the regular season with it.
Well,
whether it's
here's the thing. Paul Blackburn, Griffin Canning, and Tyler McGill, who are now essentially in the Mets rotation, right? For the sake of argument, maybe one guy can start the year in the bullpen as a long reliever, or in McGill's case, start in AAA as the sixth guy, because like I said, they don't need one till the middle of April. Those guys were slated to be basically 6, 7, and 8 at the start of this season. So they're and I had no problem with them in that role when you look at just the back half of the rotation, but now everyone's moved up 2 slots because of the fact that Montas is out and Manaea is out. So their depth, and I think they were decent depth, but all of a sudden the Met depth is being tested to where all of a sudden the idea that Brandon Waddell or Justin Hagenman or Max Kranick is making a start in April, all of a sudden is possible. And those are the depth guys that maybe you were a little bit more caught. Those are real depth guys, because those are guys that we have no idea what they're going to give them. You know what I mean? Like then you're all bets are off. Paul Blackburn is a major league starting pitcher. Griffin Canning wasn't great last year, but the guy went out and made 31 starts for a major league baseball team. And Tyler McGill is actually not the worst swing guy in the world. So I want to defend their honor by saying they're fine depth guys, but they're not depth guys anymore. They're basically in the freaking rotation, and they are one more injury away from going really into the bowels of the depth.
So is that what they're waiting for? Is that if there's another pitching injury? Because again, think about what the Mets have gone through the past 3 years. I mean, it was DeGrom, it was Verlander, it was Scherzer, it was last year with Kodai Senga. I mean, every year before the season starts, the week before, it's like, hey, by the way, we got to put somebody else on the IL.
No, it sucks. And what's crazy is last year, like I pointed out, they had bad luck with Senga. We all knew about David Peterson. The rest of the rotation was remarkably healthy. Like they were fortunate. Forget about how well they pitched. They were fortunate that Quintana, Severino, and Manaea all went out and made 30-plus starts. Obviously, it doesn't feel like luck is on our side as much as things can change.
No.
All right, let's get to some of your emails and see if the Met fan is positive or if the Met fan is feeling really negative as we learn this news about Sean Manaea. Jordan writes, Evan and Pete, there is no reason for the Mets to not go out and sign Jose Quintana, Cohen tax or not. By dipping into the depth right away and starting guys like McGill, Blackburn, and Canning, we will immediately be draining the bullpen and looking for guys to get multiple inning outs. Quintana won't save this alone, but it adds another inning eater into the mix so that our bullpen is not gassed come Memorial Day. To me, this is not a fix just for April, but a long-term investment that will certainly not be our only pitching injury this year. The more proven arms, the better. I totally get it. Like, I don't look at the state of the Met rotation and say, well, don't worry, it'll be only a couple of weeks. Manaea will be back. No harm, no foul. What's the point of signing Quintana? He's the odd man out. Or you just spent a fortune and you already have decent depth guys. Other guys are going to get hurt. And that's why when guys are still sitting out there in free agency in late February, I think twice before I just say, screw it. I trust the depth. Mark Arule, I think is how you pronounce it. I forgot. He's going to kill us all. So I'm just warning you. We're all going to get crushed. The problem with the Mets this year and WFAN in general for Mets talk and the Mets fans and the Rico is basically that everything is rainbows and butterflies this year. Wait a second. You told me it's not rainbows and butterflies. You told me it's rainbows and cotton candy? Is that what you said?
I thought it was lollipops. Rainbows and lollipops?
Now, he's saying butterflies. Mark may be right, though.
I think he's wrong.
Maybe
it's gumdrops, actually.
Yeah, it could be gumdrops. Anyhow, Matt is not happy with us. He says that we are painting rainbows and butterflies. You guys are taking your bows. You guys are getting your flowers, shaking hands, kissing babies. All the guys we know who they are. Evans, the Tommies, the Sals, those not even worth mentioning, even though I'm mentioning them now. They only exist because of you, Evan. What does that mean? These people, including you, Evan, now get a nice couple of months to sit back, relax, put your feet up. Every other year for the last, I'd say easily 6 or 7, maybe 8 years, you guys haven't been able to put your feet up to relax, undo the tie, unbuckle the belt, loosen everything up, let your hair down and chill. You guys have been scared to go to sleep at night. You guys have been looking into the closet for the boogeyman. You guys were scared to watch highlights, post-game interviews. Guys were trembling every day walking into the office, scared of what you might have to talk about after another embarrassing loss. But because last year, because of a couple of miraculous things happened, now all the talk this year is about how great everything is and how great Stearns is and how great Cohen is and how great Mendoza is and how great Soto is and how great Alonso is and how great this and that and the pitching lab and everything you guys think happened last year. I don't know what it is that makes you think it's going to happen this year, but I'm telling you right now, the odds of catching lightning in the bottle like last year are so stacked against you. And this has nothing to do with the Yankees. I think the Yankees are a flaw. All right, I got to stop them here.
I got to be honest. That's either, I was going to say it was Brandon Tierney who wrote the email, but he actually knows how to speak English. I think that might be Sean Manaea.
No, I think Matt Mark Arlay is a real person, and I think he's expressing this kind of question on why Met fans are optimistic. And Met fans, I will agree, are more optimistic now than they've ever been. Steve Cohen even said it in that locker room after one of the playoff victories. I'm trying to change the way Met fans think. And I think to a degree, Steve has done that. But I want to attack this as a whole, Matt. I can't speak for anyone else. I can only speak for myself. Obviously, I have worries about this rotation. I have expressed that over the first 30 minutes of this Sean Manaea's going on the IL edition of Rico Brogna. I am being honest in telling you it may not be the end of the world. He may only miss a handful of starts. And if that's the case, and Manaea is healthy by the middle of April, it isn't the end of the world. And that's not being optimistic. That's me just telling you, if he can throw in the 10 days, if he can throw in a week and a half, it's not the end of the world. I'm not telling you that's going to happen. I don't know. None of us do. I've tried to graduate from the world where I just assume everything sucks, but I'm also not in the world Matt described where everything is wonderful. What do I like about the New York Mets? I think their offense is tremendous. I think they have a chance to have a top 5 offense in all of Major League Baseball. We'll go into deep detail on that on the next edition of the Rico Brogna. My confidence in the brilliance of Juan Soto, the confidence in Francisco Lindor, the confidence in this lineup as a whole, this confidence in the manager, this confidence in the owner has nothing to do with the fact that right now this rotation is flawed. I don't think anyone's disagreeing. I think we're having a conversation on how it could get worse or how it may not be the end of the world, or should they go add this guy or should they go add that guy, and who the options are if more injuries continue to hit this team. But Matt described a community of Met fans that may exist with some, but it doesn't exist with me. I haven't told you my prediction for the season. I haven't told you they're going to win 95 games. I think what we've done on the Rico over the last few weeks and months is just give honest opinions on the state of the team. Who I would add, who I wouldn't add, what I like, what I don't like. Right now, this rotation, which was never going to be the strength, has been hit with multiple injuries. I certainly aren't painting any rainbows and butterflies, but clearly that is something Matt is getting from other Met fans. Let's go to David. Let's see if David, who emails us, is bringing us some positive vibes. Evan, can we try to bring some sanity to Mets land? Oh, okay. Everywhere I turn, there's Mets fans blubbering about how terrible the Mets rotation is and how they have, quote, no pitching. It may be one of the most irrational fears I have ever observed. Senga's coming back from injury. However, the only extended pitching we have ever seen from him in his rookie season, he was dominant. So why is there such a fear that he is suddenly not going to be good? Manaea is coming off a season that was not some random good season, even though he was still doing the same old thing he's always done. Certain guys do not have great career seasons doing what they always do. Manaea, on the other hand, made a very specific adjustment, and he feels more comfortable than ever, and it makes him a better pitcher. No one's worried about Tanner Scott reverting back to being terrible. Why are people acting like Manaea can't repeat what he did last season? David Peterson has historically shown flashes of being really good. His hip was always messed up, though. We never knew how much it messed him up until seeing how well he pitched in 24. I'm not saying he'll be super dominant like he was last season, but again, why so much fear that he's going to end up pitching like the guy with the bad hip when the hip has been fixed? Clay Holmes, again, this irrational or at least uninformed fear. The guy has awesome stuff. He's been a great pitcher for multiple years, yet people want to focus on his failures as a closer last season, which has zero to do with his role this season. It's like because he's wearing a Met uniform, these fans can't imagine him being the next Seth Lugo or any of the other relievers who have succeeded as starters. Straighten these fans out, Evan, or am I the crazy one? I think what you just talked about with those 3 specific pitchers are very fair. Kodai Senga and Hoff and I have kind of had this dialogue. Yes, he had an injury-riddled year last year. And my concern around Kodai Senga is that hopefully last year is in the rearview mirror. He doesn't prove to be this injury-prone pitcher that some Met fans are describing him as. And he could at least come somewhere close to what he did his rookie season, in which he was very good. He was very good. He got Cy Young votes in his rookie season. We talk about needing an ace. Kodai Senga in his rookie season pitched like an ace. Even if it wasn't every 5 days, it was more like every 6 or 7 days. So I think your assessment on Senga, completely fair. Obviously, Manaea thrown for a loop right now because of this injury. But yes, I think you look back at what he did last year, and his arm angle adjustment after watching Chris Sale, and you say to yourself, can he just repeat what he did last year? It seems realistic. I am higher on Clay Holmes than most. I'm intrigued to see what he can do this year, but we can't bank on it. I could tell you I believe in him, but he's never done it. So you certainly can't trust him. And you're right about David Peterson fixing his hip. I think all that's fair, but we need to be honest. The Met rotation is not, will be almost impossible to be the strength of the New York Mets. If we are watching a successful year this year, and God willing we are, it is not going to be because of this rotation. I admit I was stunned over the last few months of last season when it was a big part of their success. But the Met formula, and I said this a year ago, even if it didn't work out exactly this way, the Met formula in 2025 is to score runs. And let me tell you a secret. And again, we will go deep into this on our next Rico that should be posted Wednesday night. In Major League Baseball, in 2025, in this new era, if you score runs, you will win. Very weird for me to say because I love pitching, man. I love Jacob deGrom. I loved growing up watching Doc Gooden, even though it was the end of his Met tenure. I love hearing stories about George Thomas Seaver. I love pitching. That ain't the formula anymore, bro. And if you think I'm just saying that, I got numbers to back it up. If you are a top 10 offense in Major League Baseball, you're very likely to make the postseason. If you have a top 10 starting pitching rotation, you are less likely to make the postseason than a team with a top 10 offense. So you got to score runs. And where the Mets have not been hit with injuries, and I'm going to knock on my wooden desk when I say that, because God knows an injury could pop up at any moment, is with this offense. This offense has a chance to be incredibly special. That's where the Mets are a good team. That's where the Mets need to be a good team. Because you can mark my words. If I'm wrong about that and the Mets aren't scoring runs, and remember how late last season they would go innings upon innings without doing a goddamn thing offensively. I can promise you this. If that happens again, we're screwed. Can't be any more honest than that. If we are not scoring runs in 2025, we're not winning a goddamn thing. They have to hit. So a lot of our discussion around the state of the rotation, all fair concerns, but that's never going to be their bread and butter. The bread and butter is going to be scoring runs. Let me get to a few more emails. Lance writes, before I get to my main point, I just want to say you clearly didn't knock on wood hard enough when you were talking to Carlos Mendoza about Sean Manaea being the opening day starter the other day. Thank you, Lance. You are right. I did ask Carlos Mendoza. I tried to goad him into just giving us little news and saying, yes, my opening day starter is Sean Manaea. And as I was asking him that, I said, Carlos, I'm knocking on wood that he's healthy. So I take the blame. I'm an evil bastard. I jinxed Sean Manaea from being ready for the start of the season. Lance goes on, all right. Evan, you're right about David Stearns. Clearly isn't big on long-term deals for pitchers. I think he's 1,000% right after seeing all the pitching prospects that have come through the Mets farm system, especially the whole 2015 squad of Harvey, deGrom, Wheeler, Matz, and Syndergaard. I think most of us after 2015 would have said, yes, extend them all for 5 to 7 years. How would that have worked out? Would we have even had Zach Wheeler and deGrom healthy for a full season together? Other than Kershaw, Verlander, Scherzer, Sabathia, Wheeler, and Cole, what pitcher in the past 20 years has been worth a long-term deal when they first come up in free agency? But if they are following their generational player theory that made them give Juan Soto 15 years, maybe we end up signing Paul Skeens to a 12-year, $600 million deal when he comes up to free agency, as long as he doesn't turn into Kerry Wood and have multiple surgeries by then. Lance, you are mostly right. And the point I made about David Stearns, my disagreement with him, is while I would not be handing out a ton of long-term contracts to pitchers, I would take that gamble here and there. And so far, it's only been 2 off seasons, so we have more time to see. He doesn't seem to be willing to take that gamble. Who in free agency this year would I have taken that gamble on? I was intrigued by Corbin Burns. He ended up signing a big money opt-out laden contract. But even though you're right that most starting pitchers fail when they get long-term contracts, I would be willing to give one or two. Really just one. I wouldn't even say two. Sean James writes, the crusade against Dollar Store Dave. Dollar Store Dave. That, of course, David Stearns on our last Rico Brogna, episode number, I don't even know what we're up to right now. 435. We're on 436 right now. On episode 435, we read an email of a man who doesn't like David Stearns and says, hey, there's a lot of Met fans that don't like David Stearns. So Sean, combating that, writes, the fans' ire towards David Stearns is extremely misguided. We just saw Steve Cohen say we blew past the budget, but wanted Dave to work within. He talked about wanting to be below the Cohen tax. He talked about fans needing to come to the park. It's a business. Cohen doesn't want to just burn money. Stearns knows this, so he works on the fringes for the supporting part of the roster so the Mets are able to add big stars. It can't be both big stars and expensive supporting staff. The more times you spent the 10 to 15 million on a platoon player, bullpen arm, or back of the rotation starter, the less money will be available for star players. Fringe guys are not much better than a typical league minimum replacement player. As much as I want to see Iglesias return, Quintana return, David Robertson returns, if that jacks the payroll to 340 and then Steve won't pony up for an ace at the deadline, that wouldn't make much sense for us. Cohen is the one that won't allow the payroll to be a bottomless pit. If he told Stearns he was okay with a $425 million payroll, I guarantee you'd see Stearns behave differently. Stop blaming Stearns. All he has done is cobble together a roster that took us 2 wins from the World Series. Sean is spot on. If there was a endless budget, then yeah, I don't think you would try to go bargain hunting. And this goes back to what we talked about earlier about Jose Quintana. I think it's obvious that with 2 starting pitchers down and the Met depth being tested, there's no baseball reason for not signing Quintana. Like Brandon Sproat and Blake Tidwell are not being blocked right now. Hopefully they progress enough where they are in the rotation or given an opportunity in May and June. But right now you are talking about Griffin Canning and Paul Blackburn and even Tyler McGill. Signing Quintana and blocking one of those guys from getting a rotation spot is not some kind of bad baseball decision. But it comes down to money, and I understand that. And it's what Sean said. It's not a bottomless pit. So as much as I appreciate Steve Cohen and I appreciate what he has spent, it's just I can't sit here screaming about how they got to sign Quintana, even though he clearly makes the team better, when it's going to cost them another $31 million based on the Cohen tax. And I'm just assuming that that's the kind of money Quintana's asking for. With that said, Steve Cohen wants to win. He wants to win. If another injury hits this team, or if Manaea doesn't make the progress we're hoping he makes, does that force this owner to say, screw it, David Stearns, get Quintana, let's get more pitching depth? Because you don't want to let this season derail because they can't get people out. Now, real quick on Nick Madrigal, because I think it would be very offensive to the Madrigal family for me not to mention the fact that he's got a major injury and is going to be out for a while. I do not think this impacts their interest in Jose Iglesias at all. I think really what it comes down to is Brett Baty, Luis Angel Acuna. I think those are the 2 likeliest guys battling for that last roster spot. And I laid this out on the last pod. Do you want the left-handed bat? Do you want the guy that maybe you use as a bat late in the game off the bench to pinch hit for a center fielder? Or would you rather have the speed and the versatility of Luis Angel Acuna? I was never a huge fan of Madrigal making the roster to begin with. It sucks that he got hurt. It stinks he's going to miss a long period of time, but I don't think it impacts their interest in OMG.
I just doing a little bit more research, and I agree. I don't think that Jose Iglesias is part of this team anytime soon. Again, I think something major would have to happen for that to happen. But questions are coming up about Alexander Canario because he doesn't have any options left. So
he's not making the team.
So then why trade for him?
I honestly, I don't know. He was DFA'd by the Chicago Cubs. Is that what happened?
Yeah.
I wish I had a great answer. I mean, maybe they, after spring training, will try to send him down. Every team will have a chance to get him, and then they could just, after that, outright him to AAA to give them minor league depth. I just don't see a realistic scenario where he's on the team, barring injuries. I just don't see it. Like, even if they traded Starling Marte, I don't think Canario is the guy taking that roster spot. So I wish I could tell you. I mean, it's probably because it was only for cash considerations. We'll give him a look in spring training. We'll see. And maybe he could end up in AAA as outfield depth. But we've gone through the roster a million times. I just don't see where there's room for another outfielder when they're going to carry 6 at this point.
Well, I think that was the point that some people were kind of thinking of, is maybe they make a trade finally for one of these. Maybe they get rid of one of these outfielders. Maybe it's a Taylor or Siri. Well, they're not going to get rid of Siri, but maybe Taylor.
They're not going to get rid of any of them because Brandon Nimmo is here. Juan Soto is here. So let's put them to the side. They're not being traded. They just acquired Jose Siri. They just signed Jesse Winker. So now you're looking at Tyrone Taylor and Starling Marte. They love Tyrone Taylor. He's going to get a bulk of the playing time in center field. So put Tyrone Taylor to the side. So really it comes down to Starling Marte. And we know the Mets have been talking or had talked about trading him, but I don't love it because you need that right-handed DH. And no offense to Alexander Canario, it's not him. It really is Starling Marte. Though I will ask the Met fan out there, my fellow Met fan, this hypothetical. And I know this is very Hal Steinbrenner-like with their situation financially, but if the New York Mets came to you, if Steve Cohen said privately, all right, here's the deal. I ain't spending $30 million on Jose Quintana, but we have a chance to buy down a part of Marte's contract. Okay? We could dump him. We're not going to get much back, but we can dump him. And with that money we save, then we'll sign Jose Quintana. Would you sign up for that? Or would you rather say, you know what? I like Marte. I like him in that role as a part-time DH. Let me keep him here, and I'll just roll with the pitching depth.
I'm convinced that the Mets, their offense is good enough without Marte that I would take a risk at Quintana at this point in time, because this may be a problem. No offense to anybody, but this could be a problem that the Mets face all season long with the depth of the pitching staff.
Yeah, I mean, the one blessing in disguise is that let these injuries happen early, because then it does give them that chance still to sign an arm. Like, if you get ravaged by injuries in April, no one's looking to trade guys in April or May or June for that matter. You have to wait till the trade deadline. Luckily, there's still that portion of free agency where there are arms out there where if the Mets do decide, hey, let's add another depth arm, there are still a few guys out there for them to jump in. But I think over the next few weeks, we'll get a much better idea on Sean Manaea. As Mendy said, he could throw within 7 days. And if he's throwing within 7 days, it's not the end of the world. He could be back in the early part of April. We do appreciate your interaction, emailing us to ricob@gmail.com. We are very excited. I'll announce it again. We are going to spring training. We are going down there the weekend of March 8th and March 9th. And on Saturday, March 8th, we are doing a live Tipsy Rico Brogna from Das, which is this wonderful beer garden right across the street from Roger Dean Stadium, where the Marlins and the Cardinals play. The Mets are going to be playing the Marlins that night at 6:40. So we are scheduling to begin our podcast at around 4:45. Come on by, hang out, have a drink. I'll be having a drink or two. Hoff will be having a drink or two, and we will talk New York Met baseball live from spring training down at Das in Jupiter, Florida. And we will have another podcast on Sunday, probably at the stadium. But our live Hangout with You podcast will be on Saturday, March 8th from Jupiter, Florida. So we are very much looking forward to making our trip down to spring training, the first time ever. The Rico go south. But we do appreciate you listening and downloading and subscribing. We will have a brand new Rico Brogna, barring more breaking news. We'll post it Wednesday night. You can watch it live on YouTube Wednesday night, in which we look deep dive into 2024 versus 2025 and what the Mets are going to have to do to not just repeat their success, but take it a step further. Thank you very much for listening to Rico Brogna.
We hope you enjoyed this episode of the Rico Brogna podcast. It's amazing, isn't it? Make sure you download it now to keep it on you at all times.